So now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my story. I have a picture here, and this is my great grandmother, and it was taken on her wedding day. Her name was Violet Rundle, and she married John Mitchell on this particular day in 1859 in Wisconsin. And that was 1887 in Wisconsin. She was born in 1859 in Wisconsin, but she moved together with her husband then to Turner County because she wanted to be a schoolmarm. That was actually where she met my great grandfather, who was an immigrant from Cornwall. Now, here's a funny thing: if any of you are public school teachers or know them and know that we're always figuring that we're like 49th or 50th in salaries, my great grandmother came to the Dakotas because the teacher salaries were better. So there was a time when that really happened. And this is a picture of my grandmother. She is the one on the left. She was born in 1889 before South Dakota even became a state. So as you can tell then, I have very deep roots in the Dakotas. Now, I didn't know my great-grandmother Violet, but I think I would have really liked her. She was quite an advocate for whatever was going on of the times. My grandmother was the oldest of 4 daughters, but she was quite the advocate for whatever it was, and at this particular time, this was about women's suffrage. Now, one of my cousins gave me this little snippet from a newspaper article, and you can see on the side, it says 1912. And if you take a look at it, this is what it says. If you can read all that small print, I'll read a little bit of it. Mrs. John Mitchell of Hurley has done fine petition work. She works systematically, and her method may be of help to some others. One thing, she is not afraid of any man. Neither is she bold or aggressive. She just simply and naturally approaches everyone she meets and asks them to sign. She usually gets them, and if she doesn't, she dismisses it from her mind. It doesn't worry her at all. She goes with other ladies to political meetings and gets the politicians and voters to sign. This is a fine place to get names. Many of the speakers this year are paving the way by mentioning suffrage and endorsing it in their talks. Go to these speeches if you can. Mrs. Mitchell also went to Davis on a visit and took one day to canvass the town. Just by her own personal work, she will turn in from Hurley and vicinity 200 names before January 1st. I want you to take a look then at some of the other people that are a big part of my story. These 3 women are the most important to me. The woman in the center is my mother. Her name was Hazel Wheeldon. And this picture was taken during a Christmas Eve visit right here to Pierre. My daughter, the one on the right, is Jenny Hallenbeck, or she was the associate pastor at the First Methodist Church here in Pierre. And this picture was taken on a Christmas Eve in between her Christmas Eve services. If you know about the Capitol here, it's open really late at night, even on Christmas Eve. So we would go into the Capitol, and there wouldn't be anybody else there except the security guard. And we would take pictures, and actually my daughters are both singers. They were music majors. So I would ask them to sing a Christmas carol for me right out in the middle of the rotunda. And it was very, very special. She is still a United Methodist pastor, but she happens to be living up in North Dakota now, and she works for the Hospice of the Red River Valley. The young woman on the left is my other daughter, Christy Hallenbeck Ask, and she just happens to be the senior pastor and the director of mission engagement for the Good Samaritan Society in Sioux Falls. My mother was a companion on many of our trips, as you can imagine. Now here is Amy's reason for being here today. Her mother, Harriet Scott. I'll let Amy tell you a little bit more about her advocacy in a moment. But let's talk a little bit about the early history of women's suffrage and a bit more about our history here in South Dakota. This collage is a group of pictures that come from way back in the 1840s. The two women on the left are Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They were excluded from an abolition meeting by their husbands. And so the two of them got together and came up with this declaration of sentiments with some other friends. And this included a demand for enfranchisement. Now, the close-knit group of women that started this National American Women's Suffrage Association included Susan B. Anthony, who's the lady in the middle. And this Women's Suffrage Association was had Dr. Anna Howard Shaw and Carrie Chapman Catt as the last officers of that particular organization. But that organization then turned into the League of Women Voters. And here in South Dakota, our first president of the State League was Mrs. Mamie P.E.O. from Huron, South Dakota. Now, she was a pioneer of the women's suffrage movement here in South Dakota. She became president of the State Equal Suffrage League in 1910, and that particular group became the South Dakota Universal Franchise League the following year. Mamie's determination, along with that of her colleagues, allowed the women of South Dakota to claim victory in 1918 when state lawmakers and voters passed the Equal Suffrage Amendment. Now, it did not become law until the next year, but South Dakota had actually passed it on December 4th of 1919. Now, another interesting note, if any of you, of course, are into history of the state, you would know that Mamie is also the mother of Gladys P.E.O., and she had an interesting political history. At one time, she was the first woman elected to the United States Senate without having previously been appointed to her position. Now, it's an interesting story where she may have been elected, but then through some interesting machinations, she was technically only allowed to be the senator until January 30th. So she really never got to serve. Now, in looking for information about some of the interesting people that helped with our suffrage movement, I knew that Susan B. Anthony had been here to South Dakota. And so I was looking for stories and happened to come across this one little video that happened to be from KFYR in Bismarck. And this woman, Morgan Benth, was talking about 100 years of women's suffrage. Now, she's also talking about Susan B. Anthony, and at that particular time, she was saying that President Trump actually pardoned her for illegally voting in 1872. Now, the story was an interesting one because it also had some pictures with it. And the poster that's in the upper left says that Susan B. Anthony is coming to McPherson County Convention Courthouse in Leola. And I thought that was really interesting because Leola is actually the place where my mother got her first teaching job after she graduated from college. So we've been through Leola, and that was kind of fun. And another part of this story that I read was this lady, Jody Moritz, from Fulton, South Dakota, talking about the Fulton area. And she was just telling us that she, meeting Susan B. Anthony, was trying to convince the male voters of the state to give women the right to vote. And in her travels, she actually stayed right here. This is the room in the Pickler Mansion in Fulton where Susan B. Anthony actually stayed. And I guess they have left the room just like it was, so that we can all have a wonderful memory. Now, talking specifically about the League, we divide ourselves into two situations by the tax code that we use. We are a 501c4, where we can track legislation, take positions on issues, advocate for positions, and we can lobby. But we are also a 501c3, which means that we can educate people. And as you probably know, we're really famous for a lot of our voter registration situations. So these pictures are just some from our local league and some of the outdoor festivals that we attend to get voters to vote and register. Now, we have decided in the National League that 2024 will be the year of the first-time voter. And so we've got a collage of pictures here that are just some of the activities that we have in our local league. The top one on the upper left is a situation, and you can see during COVID, we are wearing our masks. We went out to the Sioux Falls campus of USD, and we're registering voters. And I had an interesting thing happen while we were there, though. We're always trying to catch the students as they walk by. And this one man that I kind of thought was probably an immigrant came walking by, and I said, "Oh, sir, would you like to register to vote?" And he goes, "No, I don't need to. You registered me to vote after I was naturalized." And I thought, oh, how exciting, and he remembered. And that leads me to some of the pictures on the right, and then on the lower situation, where one of my favorite activities is, because we have a district court in Sioux Falls, we also get to naturalize citizens there. And so we often register quite a few of them to vote after the ceremonies. And one of the things that was kind of fun, if you see the three young people there in the hallway, the judge that we had at the time, who is the one on the picture on the lower right, that's Judge Duffy. She was always very good about talking to the new citizens about registering. And those young people were the ones that she asked to register, and they knew they were going to be 18 by the time the election rolled around. The middle little note is a thank you note that I got in our league mailbox, and that was really exciting to have somebody tell me that this was a day he would remember forever and ever. So thank you all, and I'm going to let Amy take over, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about some of our advocacy work.
Thank you, Nancy. Is this working? Did it stop? Is there another microphone I should be using?
Oh, I thought
It kind of stopped in the middle.
Oh.
Is this one working? Okay. Is this one working? No? Okay.
That's only for the stream, but the house mic sounds like maybe it died.
Okay. I'll let you take a look before I start. Nancy has a great teacher voice. I run out of steam if I have to yell.
That wasn't even my playground voice.
I think this is the other house microphone, so we can try this one. The live stream mics were fine, but
Okay.
I think it's just the one in here that was. Okay, let's clip that onto you.
All right. Hello, hello.
Good job.
Is that a little better?
Put this in the pocket if you have. Very good.
All right. Technology, 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 right?
There you go.
Okay.
And just, back up to the podium you go.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, and thank you, Nancy, for that background on women's suffrage and the League. I want to start with the year 2020, because really that was a turning point in the way that we do things. 2020 was 100 years after the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, and we were planning celebrations across the state and across the country. Our governor established the Her Vote, Her Voice Committee with the South Dakota Historical Society, and we were planning on attending some amazing events and doing some fundraising to preserve and archive women's history in our state, which, by the way, is still going on, so if anybody wants to donate to that. Our National League of Women Voters, at the same time, our convention was going to be in Washington, D.C. that year. We had big celebrations planned there because not only was it the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, it was the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters as well. But, of course, COVID hit. But, you know, crisis is a good time to build culture in an organization, and that's what we did. So, like everyone else, we went virtual. I will never forget our national convention that year. If you remember how we all started figuring out how to do Zoom, I ended up sitting at home with Nancy, sitting at her house as well, out on my patio with a bowl of snacks and my laptop, attending the national conference, and we spent the better part of a half an hour teaching everyone to raise and lower their hands. And now we all know how to do that. But we got our work done because women get things done. Locally, we found some creative virtual presentations to connect with our membership at that time. Things like the New York Historical Society did a virtual tour of the Women's Rights National Historical Park in Seneca Falls. We got Molly Rosem from the USD History Department to present on some South Dakota suffrage stories. And although it looked different than we had planned, we persevered because women get things done. We also held virtual educational forums across the state. And because of this new way of communicating, we connected with new people across the state, and we expanded our membership because women get things done. And of course, 2020 was an election year. We connected with the Minnehaha County Absentee Voting Task Force, their report to see what could be done to make sure our citizens knew about early voting in South Dakota. Nope, not on. Okay. We continued our voter registration efforts as well. We did it from a distance. We invested in, you know, those mechanical grabbers that you have to reach something at a high shelf. We invested in those, and we masked up and we passed out voter registration forms to people in their cars and places like food giveaways. And why did we do that? Well, because women get things done. So what did we learn from the COVID pandemic? Our meetings became hybrid, as this meeting is today. We continue to do that. And because of that, we've made it easier to reach more people in more locations. We increased our social media use during that time because, well, for better or worse, that's how people are connecting now. We've been able to maintain our integrity through civil conversation on social media as well as other events. And because we are one of the most reliable, nonpartisan organizations, we continue to be a trusted source of information both on and off social media. And we started testifying virtually in the legislature. I do want to recognize the passing of Representative Bob Glanzer at that time. He was the third person in our state to pass away from COVID. But the legislature continues to allow virtual testimony today, which results in more participation by our citizens, and more participation is key to a healthy democracy. We also continue to have statewide opportunities for virtual education. And we've also formed many coalitions to work on topics of mutual interest. And why do we do that? Well, because women get things done, but sometimes we need a little help. So coalitions are a great way to do that. Now, Nancy previously talked about her family history and how that impacted her own role in the League of Women Voters. Well, here's mine. I usually joke that I've been attending League of Women Voters meetings since the womb. It's not really that far off. This is me and my mom, Harriet Scott. She's been active in the League since the 70s, and she's served in many leadership roles and continues to be active today. I joined the League of Women Voters in 2003. That was the year my son was born. After becoming a mom, it truly hit me why preserving democracy is so important. It's for our future and for our children and grandchildren's future. So when I joined, the South Dakota League was down to 2 local leagues and less than 80 members. It wasn't that the work wasn't important, just all organizations tend to have ebbs and flows. But over the 20 years since I joined, the league has now grown and we have 6 local leagues and close to 200 members. So what changed? Well, I believe it was our country. As division became greater and discourse became more and more ugly, the league emerged again as a nonpartisan voice that focused on civil discourse. And that's very attractive to most people. Now, the picture on the left here was taken when the league was working on redistricting efforts in 2020, 2021, which brings me to our next league activity. The league takes positions on issues at the local, state, and national level. And while we do not support or oppose candidates or parties, we have always taken positions on issues. Redistricting is one of the issues that leagues across the nation took up starting in 2019. How we come to our positions is that we study the issue. We look at it from all angles, and through a consensus process, come up with our position. And this process is one that we are very proud of at the league. On the issue of redistricting, our consensus was that legislators should not be allowed to draw their own districts because it basically allows them to choose their voters. So, now I'm going to give you a little educational piece, which is another piece that the league loves to do. And redistricting is the process that happens every 10 years all across our country after the census data is released. It's the process of creating district maps for state and local communities. It impacts how communities are represented and how resources are allocated. Redistricting has a long history of being manipulated by political parties on both sides. This manipulation is called gerrymandering. So you might ask, where did the term gerrymandering come from? Well, back in 1812 in Massachusetts, then Governor Elbridge Gerry approved redrawn districts in his state to favor his own party. The districts were drawn in such an extreme way that the local newspaper said it looked like a salamander and dubbed the manipulation gerrymandering. They even published the map with drawn-on wings that made it look like a dragon. Excuse me. So let's take a quick look at gerrymandering. This slide shows 4 ways to draw districts given the split of voters between the orange and purple voters. Now, we all know that people don't live in straight lines, and not everyone always votes for the candidate in their own party, but bear with me as we use this as an example. So the 2 examples in the middle show fair ways to draw the lines so that the expected results of an election would be proportionate to the electorate. 60% orange, 40% purple. The 2 examples on the right show gerrymandered districts. Of the 2 on the left, or on the right, excuse me, the one on the left is drawn so that each of the districts have proportionally more orange voters than purple voters. So even though the orange voters are 60% of the population, they would have a majority of voters in all districts. This is called cracking. And this is called cracking, and as the purple voters are cracked so that they have less of a chance of winning in any district. The one on the right is drawn so that the purple voters are the majority in 60% of the districts, even though they're only 40% of the population. This is called packing, as the orange voters are packed into their own quote-unquote safe districts with very few purple voters in there. This allows the rest of the purple voters to be in the majority in more districts than are proportionate to the electorate. Now, as you can imagine, back in 1812, it was quite the chore to gerrymander a state. But given the technology we have today, it's much easier to manipulate those maps. So what did the league do about this? We held some virtual educational forums about the process. We had showings of the movie Slay the Dragon, which is a reference back to that salamander dragon from the 1800s, and it's worth a watch if you haven't seen it. We attempted a petition drive to pass the Independent Redistricting Commission that would take the responsibility out of the hands of politicians that could benefit from the way the lines were drawn. The cake you see there in the bottom left with the map of South Dakota on it, well, we had a little fun letting each person gerrymander the cake when they cut into it, and there are some real interesting looking pieces as a result of that. And although our petition did not make it to the ballot, we considered the process a success as we educated the public about redistricting, and the public meetings around the redistricting process were packed with people. And we'll keep working on this because women get things done even if it takes a while. So as we worked on the petition drive, we became more aware of how our constitutional right to direct democracy in our state was being chipped away. So we took another route to help ensure that the ballot initiative process maintains its integrity, and that's through litigation. The League of Women Voters engages in litigation across the country on a variety of issues. And if we look back to redistricting, we did across the nation have some litigation on both against democratically drawn maps as well as Republican drawn maps. So we don't do it based on party, we do it because it's what's right. In 2023, we were successful in helping to get rid of SB 180, which had put some unconstitutional constraints on the ballot initiative process. There we go. We were proud of that victory because women get things done. So what else are we working on? The Equal Rights Amendment. What exactly does the ERA say? Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. It's pretty simple. Let's get that one done too. So here are a list of all of our 501c3 activities. They include things like voter registration, legislative coffees, candidate forums, educational forums, our vote411.org website, which I'll talk about in a minute, some museum exhibits, as well as some get out the vote activities. These are probably more what the general public associates with the League of Women Voters because they're more visible. These are nonpartisan activities, educational in nature, and because the League insists on civil discourse, they tend to be very well liked and very well respected across the board. Here's some pictures of our members engaging in these activities. Everything from registering voters at outdoor events and naturalization ceremonies, as Nancy previously talked about, to our legislative coffees and candidate forums, to our participation in a museum display in that upper right corner there. There's Nancy and I both in that picture. And that was about the suffrage movement, and we just do a lot because women get things done. The last piece here I want to talk about is our Vote 411 website. This is technology again in the new generation here. Now granted, anyone under the age of 30 always asks us, what does 411 stand for? And those of us over 30 know that it was what you used to dial on your landline to get information. So the League of Women Voters Vote 411 website is a one-stop shop for voter information nationwide. There's information on how to register to vote, links to check on your voter registration, and personalized voting information during the election season. Here in South Dakota, we have information on anything that's voted on statewide, as well as the legislative races. What we do is we reach out to candidates and give them the opportunity to enter information such as biographical information, links to their candidate websites and social media, and some nonpartisan questions they can answer that will give voters more information about the candidate and where they stand on issues. So how do we do that? If a voter can click on find what's on your ballot, this is what shows up. They can enter their street address to find information on the items they'll be voting on, anywhere from candidates to ballot issues. We do not edit any of the information the candidate enters, so voters are assured they're hearing straight from the candidate. We also enter the Attorney General's explanation on ballot issues, so that voters can have a chance to learn more about the issues they're going to be voting on. And we also explain what a yes vote and a no vote means on those ballot issues, because sometimes it's the opposite of what we think it means. Voters can even mark their choices on Vote 411 and get a printout of their selections. They can then take it with them to their polls, and this is especially helpful when those ballots get really long. Now, we've been offering this website in South Dakota since 2016, and each election cycle we have thousands of South Dakota voters from all across the state using our Vote 411 website to educate themselves before they vote. And we found out just this week that our Vote 411 website has been nominated for a Webby Award in the People's Voice category. So feel free to vote for us if you wish, because, you know, we like voting. Well, that concludes our presentation on the League of Women Voters in the New Millennium. We are proud to empower voters and defend democracy. And please note, we do not limit our membership to only women. All genders are welcome in the League. Thank you for being here today, and thank you to the South Dakota Historical Society. As always, it's an election year. Don't forget to vote. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about advocacy for your position on the Equal Rights Amendment.
Speak more about the advocacy on the Equal Rights Amendment. Is that what you're saying?
Amy, this one was supposed to be live.
I repeat that.
Oh, is this one not
Oh,
on it?
that probably works
Yeah, it's
too
on,
now.
okay. Sure, the advocacy, what we're doing for advocacy for the ERA.
Right, and especially in South Dakota, because my understanding is there's been some movement to undo the vote that hasn't been passed.
There was a piece in the legislature that tried to undo the passage of it in South Dakota. No one really knows if it was legal or not to do that, or constitutional to do that, because at the national level, it didn't pass in time. There were recent national pieces to just kind of sideswipe that time limit and pass it anyway. That just did not pass. So we are still fighting to use the same language. We haven't changed the language and what we're looking for, and just figure out a new way to get that passed. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all.